So this next panel is entitled Prevention and Response, for obvious reasons. We have the overarching conversation about gun violence, now having a conversation about how do we prevent and move towards meaningful solutions. And that covers everything. So thank you all. So I'll take my seat in front and we'll begin our panel by having you all give a brief 1 minute, if you can, summary of the work that you do and what lands you on this panel, and kind of the correlation between your work and this panel.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Good morning. I'm sorry. First and foremost, I want to thank the mayor and everybody involved for this platform. Again, my name is Adrian Muldrow, and as Will stated, I was a former vice president of the Baltimore chapter NAACP. I also was the founder of a youth and adult reentry program in Baltimore called We Can Achieve at Druid Heights Community Development Corporation. Now I'm the director of youth initiatives with Neen Cares. In addition to, I'm also the branch manager for a staffing agency. So, and I'm also, I have been a person who have been back and forth. I don't know what term they use now, but I am a part of the reentry community. Let me say that. That's so. All of those different hats. So I'm grateful that I'm able to lend some expertise to this topic. So.
Hi, my name is Mike Drummond, and there's a little bit of a bio in the panel, so I'm not going to review that. But I did want to start out with a set of statistics. For every justifiable homicide that as classified by the FBI, there are 34 shooting deaths connected to the commission of a crime, and there are 78 suicides for every one justifiable homicide. And I, like some of the other questioners, includes the problem and the rate of suicide with handguns as part of this violence and part of this problem. This is a public health crisis. We ought to be treating it that way. We need to be funding and providing research in order to determine what's the best ways communities can respond. Obviously, access to behavioral health care services is a key for many of the people who are affected by gun violence. We have inequities in our system, which were alluded to in the first panel: racism, poverty. But now more and more of us don't have the means when there's a behavioral health problem that someone has within our family. And probably the hardest people to access behavioral health services are people with private insurance, because those private insurance rates are so low, most providers stay out of network and require the person to do it.
I don't want you to give it all away for free at the very beginning. So
I'm just trying to...
He's a showstopper at the beginning.
No, you didn't. Good morning. I'm Stephen Tillett. I'm the pastor at Asbury Broadneck United Methodist Church. I'm doing the best I can with him. I'm trying. I am the immediate past president of the Anne Arundel County branch NAACP, and I'm now the chair of the Legal Redress Committee. And I'm here, I guess, primarily because of my participation with ACT, Anne Arundel Connecting Together. I'm the co-chair of the Gun Violence Prevention RAT, our research action team. As we just heard this statistic that you just shared, one justifiable homicide for every 34 murders and 78 suicides. So that the rationale that the NRA, of which I'm a member, I may be the only NRA member here, but I will say very clearly, they don't speak for me in so many instances. They speak for the gun manufacturers, because the majority of NRA members understand that we need stricter controls so that guns can't get into some of the wrong hands. And that was discussed some in the last panel with domestic violence folks and people who have demonstrated a capacity and a willingness to be violent outside of domestic violence. Those folks should never have access to guns. And I'll close with this. Our population in the United States is 329 million people. There are over 300 million guns in circulation in the United States. Let me say that again. Our population is 329 million. There are over 300 million guns in circulation. So while there's some mental health aspects, socioeconomic aspects, we also have a gun problem. There are too many damn guns.
So, I'm Stephen Thomas. I'm a lieutenant with the Anne Arundel County Police. However, I'm assigned to crisis response, which I'm really proud of what we do. We fully integrated mental health and law enforcement. And so it's both ends of the spectrum that we work hand in hand at far upstream at coming up with solutions to look at children and individuals and what they've been through and how do we help them so that the violence doesn't take place. A simple phrase is, instead of asking someone what's wrong with you, what's happened to you? On the other end, we respond to all traumatic events in the county. So we're there to help first responders as well as the community and those that are intimately involved in the incident move past what's happened, because it's extremely difficult, that we're not going to change what happened, but how can we help them as they move on in their lives.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Mayor. My name's Kathy Gieslin. I am with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and I oversee our Be Smart campaign, which is a campaign to reduce unintentional child deaths and suicide, which result when a child or teen gains access to an unsecured firearm. And unlike a lot of the topics that we're talking about today, which around gun violence, which are incredibly complex, and I am grateful to be part of those conversations, we know that this topic is surprisingly simple, and having an unsecured firearm, gun owners and non-gun owners alike, reducing access to children, it is really simple. Responsibly storing firearms, everybody, all adults can agree on that, and that's really what the Be Smart program aims to educate all adults on. So I'm grateful to be here to talk about that today. So thank you again for having me here.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me, Mayor Buckley. Well, my name is Sheila Ford, and I'm the safety manager for the Annapolis Public Housing Authority. I came here as a retired lieutenant from the DC Metropolitan Police Department. I had 25 years of commendable service while I was there. Will has informed me that my purpose here is to give you a boots on the ground impression of what it is to be a victim of gun violence and how to prevent it. I hope that I'll be able to do that. Please feel free to ask me whatever questions you need. It's going to be a raw response. Please understand that.
Thank you all. So in our conversation about prevention, going bonkers. Our conversation about prevention. As we know, there's millions of different ways to approach issues and problems. So we develop strategies to kind of like get to some change to move the needle. In your experiences and where you come from and the work that you do, what moves the needle? How can we prevent gun violence and harm to people as a result of crimes involving handguns?
So it's a good question. As I said, we are not doing research. We're also not moving the needle. The problem is getting worse and worse because we really haven't implemented things that might and we need to begin that process and really find out what moves the needle. Something else I would want to say is that, as Dr. Gomez was talking about marginalized communities, we now have whole communities experiencing violence over and over and over again, and entire communities traumatized and outside and obviously wanting to find solutions but not provided the resources that would help them find solutions. And so I think that one next step for those communities who are experiencing the worst violence, but it is something which helps across our entire city and county, is the use of peer supports and the use of people who are from the community working as, and who know the members of that community, working as community health workers, who can identify and help link individuals who are struggling with comprehensive resources, who can provide hope in helping them achieve goals and finding meaning and purpose and reward in their life. So I think that would be an initial thing to move forward next.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, that's a that's a very good question, and I've heard so many different perspectives on that. But until we're able to give people tools to deal with conflict, with their own conflict, you know, because I hear people talk about the NRA, I hear people talking about policy. You know, I've even had the opportunity to come back and forth and talk about policy. But until we promote a mindset of peace, and a young lady just said it earlier, helping folks to de-escalate violence, because if we don't have the tools to de-escalate within ourselves, right, then, you know, each individual situation is, you know, you're going to continue to have these individual violent situations. So for me, in my perspective, in being in the heart of violence, at the end of the day, if someone is able to de-escalate me and someone else's disagreement, it can go away. But being able to resolve conflict is key. And now what that looks like, I mean, we have some other experts, you know, that can talk about, and we have a whole bunch of programs that are out here that needs funding. So, but conflict is being able to resolve it.
Thank you very
That's key.
much. Thank you. And I want to remind you all, thank you, Adrian, for that. Because one of the reasons why we're out here in the tent on the lawn, how many of you all heard the mayor's opening statement, who's here right now? One of the reasons why we're here is because we want to begin having the conversation about gun violence, mass shootings, and gun violence in communities by stressing the importance of civil discourse, i.e., are we able to disagree in a civil manner and be strategic about how we're solving problems. So I thank you for that. And it ties directly into why we're here today. So does anyone else?
Mr. Drummond said something about peer supports. And I think one of the things that needs to happen as far as community concerns is positive peer pressure, that community standards have to change. We can't rely on the system per se. There can be some programs, some advantages that come from maybe making conflict resolution counseling available, mental health counseling available. But at the end of the day, it also, like when we're dealing with these situations in the schools, a lot of instances the kids come from home with that stuff. The school system didn't do that. They came from home with it, and then the challenge has to be dealt with in the system. In the same way in society, people are coming from their homes into community with those challenges. And until community says enough and brings about, and honestly, I don't think we can rely on some of the things that we used to be able to rely on to help protect us. As far as gun violence is concerned, the Supreme Court showed that in 2008 with the District of Columbia versus Heller case, where they decided that everybody should be able to have a gun. They interceded when the city had said, we want to limit handguns in the District of Columbia so that there will be less suicides and less murders And the Supreme Court said, no, let there be more. And so they had that ruling. And today they've done it again, gerrymandering for everybody. So we can't count on them to do the right thing. Therefore, it has to emanate from community.
The Department of Justice had Northwestern University do a study. It's called the Juvenile Justice Project, in which it was the first longitudinal study where they looked at children that are incarcerated, and they looked at Cook County, Illinois, which encompasses Chicago. And how do we end up with a child being incarcerated, which is going to lead eventually to further problems? We have to look at what is the cause root of an issue. The behavior is a symptom. So how do we correct or work to assist that? What the root cause is. 90% of the children that are incarcerated in that study have been exposed to trauma. Now, most people also with suffering from a traditional mental illness never have a negative interaction with the criminal justice system. And what I mean by that is they're not a criminal, they don't commit crimes. However, generally, it's highly likely that they will be a victim of a crime. When you look at those children, though, 90% of those in that study are either end up being career criminals. What I mean is the revolving door in and out of jail, or they prematurely die from violence. So what can we do up front to help those children? I can tell you some of the things that I'm proud that we do in the county is we have deferments. And what I mean by that, if a child is charged with an offense, we look at the mental health issue. Our juvenile system and the police department sends the report to us at crisis response. We will work with that child and their family. When we do that, we actually have a 96% success rate that child does not commit another crime. And the reason I bring that up, when you look at gun violence, that's not the first interaction that someone generally has with the criminal justice system. So we have to have an interceptor point early on to address those issues. Another thing I'm proud that we do is we have a Handle with Care program. It started in West Virginia, but when a child is exposed to trauma, either at home, in the community, we notify the school system, and all we say is handle with care. So that if that child is having a bad day, their homework's not done, that it's not giving an excuse, but it's giving the leadership in the school an understanding that that child may have gone through something recently, and there's an understanding of why they are acting the way they are.
I certainly agree and appreciate what everything that's already been previously stated, but crime prevention and drug prevention and gun violence prevention has been studied and studied and studied and studied. Very valuable research has come to play. We're reacting to that, but it's not sustainable. It's not something that's really working. We study underlying causes. Well, there are underlying causes to underlying causes. Are we really digging deep enough? Are we really going to what's really at the core of all of this? Social inequities, educational inequities, financial inequities. Are we studying those things? Those are the things that I've identified in my career as being the real core reasons why people resort to violence, why people resort to unconventional means of survival. Those are the things that we need to look at. Racism and discrimination, disparity. Those are the things we need to look at. Let's attack it from another direction. The direction we're going down, we're getting results, yes we are, but they're not sustainable results. They're not changing mindsets, they're not changing lives, they're not building communities. We need to look at it from another perspective.
So the one thing I want to say to the point of access, or speaking directly to gun violence, and not necessarily just to handgun violence, we know that what captures the attention of the public is certainly school shootings or mass shootings, and we know that in those cases, studies and research tells us that incidents of active shootings in schools, the often current or former students, often those guns are obtained from the home. So going back to what I had said earlier, if we can make sure that storage comes into play. So I think, we can change behavior without ever implementing an actual policy or changing a law. And so I was so grateful that you mentioned positive peer pressure, because I think those are just behavior changes, right? Like, there's things that we can all do by talking to, finding the right messenger. And that might look different in a different community or in a different space. But it can be as simple as making sure that maybe it's somebody in a church that's sending this message. It might be law enforcement that's the right messenger, right? It might look different, but we know that there are cases where there could be a tragedy that's prevented if the messenger had actually prevented those guns from being responsibly stored. So in the Be Smart message, the T is actually tell your peers to be smart. It's actually an acronym. So I think that's really important. But I also think it's important to note that that's, again, what captures the national attention. But we also know that teens are oftentimes carrying guns out of fear or self-protection. So there's a much bigger problem that we also need to address. Why are guns falling into the hands of teens or children? So again, it's an adult responsibility. So figuring out and how and why, if a teen is accessing that gun, figuring out the ramifications of that teen ending up, if a teen is being prosecuted or charged for carrying that gun, that changes the trajectory of their whole life. So really, again, digging into the how and the why that teen is getting access to the gun, it's still an adult responsibility. I think it's really important to always take that and drive that point home. So I think, I just think that's where we as adults have the whole responsibility in this. And it's never a child. A gun has to cross through an adult's hands before it ends up in the hand of a child.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Absolutely. So I heard a couple themes, and I heard some things. You talked about underlying the things underlying the underlying issues. So I know as I look across the panel, I know that each of you have, and you're on this panel because of your prevention efforts. And I hate to even use the word prevention, because we are talking about some of the more deeper intersectional things instead of just, to your point, about guns, that there's deeper things. So can each of you, very briefly, which I know is a struggle for all of us, I know it is because we have so much that we do, is can each of you speak to some of those things that you've been a part of or witnessed or efforts, whether it's at the community level, whether it's on HACA properties, or whether it's in Baltimore or whatever? Can you speak to those things? And I'd like for you to go down the line, but we need to keep track of time, so just speak to some of those things.
I'll start.
Like ceasefire.
I'll start. My experience as a law enforcement officer and the short time that I've been here at HACA, I've been told that I always mispronounce that. Violence, more often than not, in my opinion, is a learned behavior. If you come from a dysfunctional home where violence and crime and those kind of things are the norm of the household, of course the children are going to respond to that, and they're going to go out, and this is what you're going to see. This is how they learn. This is how they cope. This is what they do. That's one of the things that I'm speaking of when I speak about the underlying causes. We need to address why families resort to violence as a means of survival. Those are the core issues that we need to address. We can say it's education. Okay, why is the education system not working? Why do we have one school who has everything and another school who has practically nothing? Is the family responsible for that? No. Society, the city, the government is responsible for that. Those are the kind of things that we need to address. Again, those are the things that I've identified as being underlying causes for violence. This is what they know. This is what they've been taught. This has been passed down from generation to generation, from family to family. I see it all the time in HACA. The fights, the conflicts, the disputes. We can provide them with all the resolutions and ways of addressing those things, but that's just going to take care of the top, the surface issues. What's really motivating them? What's putting them in a position where this is the only recourse that they have, or that they believe that they have?
So I think an example of a prevention effort is, our program works to educate members of the community. So we train Be Smart volunteers who then go out to educate members of the community. So an example would be in Charleston, South Carolina. They were seeing an unfortunate spike in unintentional shootings. And so they decided, volunteers there, Be Smart volunteers there, decided to work with members of the medical community. So they made it a goal to educate at grand rounds. And now members of the Medical University of South Carolina, they present Be Smart during grand rounds. They have Be Smart posters in all of the medical facilities in Charleston, South Carolina. And so now the medical community is able to really educate their physicians and their patients on what it means to be smart, which means, again, to what I was saying, it depends who you're hearing the message from. And so it looks very different. I'm a member and, I'm speaking for Moms Demand Action, which obviously is different than if you are hearing from your physician learning about how to responsibly store your guns. So I think that's a different angle at looking at what, who you're hearing the message from. And I think that can be consumed very differently. And so I think that's how different volunteers are taking that message. In Texas, we have all of our materials in Spanish as well. So they trained all of the Head Start caseworkers there to deliver the message as they were going in to talk to their community members there. So I think it's just, again, figuring out how to deliver the message.
To sort of going with Ms. Ford said, completely agree with what she's saying, is when you look at what the families and children and the trauma that they're facing, it has to be addressed. So Dr. Jeff Mitchell from University of Maryland, who is the modern creator of critical incident stress management, he has a saying, a crisis is a crisis until there's resolution. Until that trauma is addressed, and it can be transgenerational. The trauma can go from generation to generation. And that's where, when we start addressing that trauma, that will make a difference in affecting the lives of children and the families, as well as the community. Because there's also, not just for that, it's community trauma as well that has to be addressed. And that will make a difference.
So I wanted to, before you move to the next one really quickly, one of the first times I did work with Lieutenant Thomas was in Robinwood. And we were at an opioid prevention thing that we do out of the mayor's office called NAM. And I was impressed, and we talked outside. I was impressed because he broke away from the group and he made it a priority. He said what he does is he goes and he talks to groups of young people when he sees them together, which is totally different than identifying a problem and going and jumping in the middle of it. And we had a conversation about that, which impressed me greatly. So, I want to commend you for that. But that's what I consider prevention as well.
Thank you.
Can you briefly speak on,
So it's another thing, when there's trauma, and these are all based on principles initially to help first responders and the military after we're exposed to the traumas of our job. And on a whole side note, everyone thinks that the stress of the job, it's not the stress, it's the trauma that we face daily of death, responding to bad scenes, car accidents, homicide scenes, SIDS babies, and things like that. But there's a principle called PI, proximity, immediacy, and expectancy. When the trauma happens, going to where the trauma is to help people as soon as possible. But studies have shown the most important thing is the expectancy. The expectation that people are going to do better. And what I mean by that, the trauma happened, but how do we move by that? And think of the expectancy that we have for ourselves and each other, and do we fulfill our expectations? So with that, I like going and talk to young people and teaching them to believe in themselves. And it's a thing of hope and help, and it's all part of critical and stress management, of giving people hope as well as the help to fulfill that hope. And how do we do that? And it's really important.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Lieutenant Thomas mentioned CISM, critical incident stress management. I'm also a retired Air Force chaplain, and that was my job after 9/11 in the Pentagon community, was to do CISM debriefs for the people who had survived the attack on the building. I think our communities would be well served if, when there is a critical incident like that, debriefing, that stress management, that counseling would be made available. We know in schools, if there's a tragedy, that counselors descend on the school building and they make that available for students. We need to do that in community as well, because make no mistake, stress is real. My wife is an obstetrician, and I think it was in April was maternal health month. And Sharita was putting out a lot of statistics that talked about some of the negative birth outcomes for even well-to-do African-American women as a result of underlying stress from being African-American women in the United States of America. People don't want to believe that's real. I got something for you. So there were people who grew up in the Caribbean, outside of the United States. When they got here, they did not have that level of underlying stress. After one generation of being brown in America, they had the same level of stress as people who've been here for generations. And I'm not just talking about women, I'm talking about everybody. That there's stress attached to being brown in this country, there's stress attached to being poor in this country. Being poor is criminalized. Having an addiction is criminalized. Now, of course, since it's kind of crossed the railroad tracks and it's in other communities, it's a health issue. It was always a health issue. And so we have to be mindful of that and the way that we try and create some positive outcome opportunities for people who go through stress so that they don't become criminalized, but instead they have an opportunity to heal.
So I was having a couple of thoughts when you posed this question. One of them dovetails with what Steve said about the expectancy, and also Reverend Tillett about hope. And when you talk about prevention, you naturally gravitate to children. Our children need to have horizons that are wide open and filled with possibilities that they want to pursue. And we, in these marginalized communities, end up contained, very small, very crowded worlds that don't seem to offer them much hope. And that's the beginning of the end, the beginning of a shutdown. And all of us as parents try to offer that to our children. Every child needs that. They need broad horizons. So the other part about prevention is helping people see what is it that's important that helps them be in a good place emotionally and physically. What's the things you do every single day in order to feel good about yourself and feel good about what you're going to be doing and able to meet your challenges? What's in your toolbox when you face a challenge? And I really totally want to impress upon you is that all children are born beautiful, and all of them can provide something exceptional to our world, and we have to give them the opportunity to do that.
Good stuff. For me, Will, that was a very, very, very good question. You know, I'm gonna go all the way back to when I was the inmate council president. You know, in terms of the things that I've been involved in as a response, I always felt that with a lack of information, we fall victim to so many horrors. So even in prison, I saw that. You know, de-escalating violence because folks couldn't get out of the cell, you know, and being the liaison. So for me, that's why We Can Achieve. When I came out, I started We Can Achieve because I knew that there are barriers. For years, for me, there's always been the barrier of employment. So when I started We Can Achieve, we started doing bringing the information to the community. We started building the relationship, going to the Department of Juvenile Services. We went to parole and probation and established that MOU because I understood where the problem was. I wanted to work with the folks who were having the biggest challenge because I had the biggest challenge. So, and what we did in that process, we also brought the community in, right? Because the community was vital in that process too, and we did community cleanup. And then, you know, when you look at the NAACP, being involved in NAACP was amazing because then not only do you get the community involved, but you can do voter registration, you know, because you teach people the significance and the power in the vote. And also doing broader community events. When you look at bringing health testing and all of that kind of stuff to communities where you have folks that's never been to the doctor, right? I mean, ever been to the doctor. So, you know, and never even thought about signing up for health insurance, and you're bringing that to them. And now when you think about like my career and working for the mayor's office in Baltimore and helping folks with resumes, being responsive, because if people need help, people in community are, in the communities across the country, they are upset. Folks are upset and responding out of anger. So when we see violence, we see people responding out of anger. There's a lot of folks are screaming out, I don't know what to do, right? So, and with Neen Cares, what we did and what we constantly do, our third year, we try to work with parents and kids because at the end of the day, there aren't a lot of services and programs and mediums. Like we use sports to mentor. You know, because at the end of the day, you know, our kids even won't even, you know, they won't listen to us. But if we bring in a rapper or a sports guy or somebody, but anyway, at the end of the day, in terms of response, those are some of the things that I've been a part of in response.
So I want to thank you all for your responses and for your comments. And as you can see, and we're working on this, as you can see, each of these subjects we can literally have a separate summit on. And so we're building a model to do that. I want to reference some of the work that ACT is doing, which is convening a lot of these things like that, and we'll be partnering and working with them and supporting their efforts. Yes. But not right this second. Your check is in the mail. So are there questions from the audience? And there will be, I want to remind you all that following the entirety of this, there's going to be a press conference, and there will be an opportunity to learn more about ACT and some of the work that they're doing and how the mayor and the county executive is supporting their efforts and embedding some of their work.
Well, so can I jump on that since you just mentioned it?
Yeah, but it has to be.
Okay, I know, quick. So, Do Not Stand Idly By is a program that has emerged as a result of IAF affiliates around the country. Industrial Areas Foundation ACT is an affiliate of IAF. And so Do Not Stand Idly By is a program that tries to use market forces to help bring about more accountability from gun manufacturers. And those market forces can be applied when, and we've had this discussion with Chief Altamari, when police departments have certain standards that they're looking for, certain safety features that they're looking for in the weapons. And after a while, they say, okay, well, we buy 750 guns, so if we're going to buy them from you, we want these features. And if you don't have them, you need to start working on them. And when that pressure emerges from the marketplace, that will help to make a difference. There's also a consortium that is forming through the National Conference of Mayors, that the mayor of Cincinnati is trying to work and have other cities work and come together to do that. So this afternoon at 4:25, yes, there will be a press conference. The mayor and the county executive will be signing on, so that Annapolis and Anne Arundel County will become, will join the 135 plus communities that are part of Do Not Stand Idly By.
Thank you, thank you. So that was probably the first time in my life I've ever been able to tell a pastor, and definitely the pastor of my church, you got to wrap the sermon up. Which, when we're little, we all wish we could do that, right? Right, seriously, like, yeah. Okay, so let's move into questions. And we have, I've been instructed you have 30 seconds to answer a question. And let's go.
I was going to say thank you. I love that you go out into the communities to talk. And we would like to partner with you. I think you have a lot of grandparents who are taking care of the kids because the parents are in jail. I'm experiencing it even in watching different people in my family live in the city. The son, the grandchild who was 5 years old, who was this great little kid, innocent. Now he wants to be like his dad, who was in a gang, who was in a shootout. Now he's taking pictures. He's holding up signs. He's doing all stuff. And his mother is allowing that, and the grandmother. So when I try to talk to some of these people, it's different. So I think it's all in the person who's delivering the message. So it would be good if you guys could really partner with some of us to go out into these communities to do this to help the kids. All right, thank you. And then vicarious trauma. For those who are doing this, they need to periodically get training.
Very quick, and this may not be a question specifically for anyone, if you can answer later. Just repeating the idea that community must be involved, but knowing the disparities that exist in the communities that are so majority affected. Can you recommend any avenues or programs to provide incentives for community members to participate, whether it be like childcare or financial incentives to get them out because they have to work? They might not be able to come here today.
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to resident councils who we're trying to empower and strengthen in the city of Annapolis in particular, and Housing Authority. And I want to also mention, we also have Street Corner Ministries, and we have One Caring Annapolis, and we have coalitions of people who are doing work to empower citizens to be involved in that, because you're right, that extra step that we're asking them to take when they're already in crises is a tough one. But are there other responses to that?
Just to respond to that, one of the things that I discovered from the residents of public housing is one of the barriers to their self-sufficiency is they have no transportation to get to a job. If they do have a job, they have childcare issues. So, I mean, those are two things that we could address as a community by providing those type of supports for people who are trying to get out of public housing. We have a lot of wonderful people in public housing who are just there because of bad circumstances, bad choices, bad decisions. But they recognize that and they want to do better. But we need to give them the supports that they need to really do better.
Any other responses to that? They have to be really...
One of the big things is helping people with Maslowian needs, and actually to the faith community. I've seen success in impoverished areas for children to go to church without their parents because food's been provided. Things like that the children will go, and for the security, the safety of the church, they want the organized activities, but also for food and those basic necessities.
Sure. So this question really builds on something a member of the previous panel said. She noted that young people in Chicago often choose to carry weapons because they do not feel safe. And I'm starting to formulate my own answers, and it's literally safe cities. But the desire to feel safe, I think, is a common thread for people choosing to carry weapons. What do we do to make people feel safe such that they do not need to carry weapons?
Remove. Can you hear me? Yes. Remove all the other guns that they feel they need to be protected from is a big key. We have to deal. This is a gun control issue in terms of it's logical that if you know there are dangerous people around you, you start to think about how can I protect myself.
That's a real good question, because that speaks to bullying, that speaks to a whole bunch of stuff, in terms of the kids feeling safe. I think that's a bigger issue than the NRA and all of that. I think that has to do more or less with individualized situations and individualized schools or individualized communities, because you really don't, it's like an open-ended type of situation. But my thing is teaching conflict resolution, teaching young people other ways to resolve violence, and talking to young people about other ways to make money, right? Because most of the kids that if they, if you figured out, I know I've talked over 30 seconds, so let me shut up. All right, but conflict, teaching them how to resolve conflict.
Thank you.
And the elephant in the room is this. We have 329 million people, 300 million guns. The gun culture in this country has to be addressed. And as long as we give the gun manufacturers a pass and say, well, that's just the way it is. People, if something is stupid, I don't care if it's just the way it is, it needs to change. It's not working. I give Australia credit. When they had their last massacre in the 90s, they said this is some foolishness. They had people turn in guns. They haven't had one since. New Zealand responded the same way with intelligence a few months ago. When are we going to get smart?
Okay, and then we have to wrap this up.
And I just want to reiterate, because, I'm a broken record here, that 4.6 million kids live in homes with unsecured, unlocked guns. So, if we can just get at that nugget too, there is a piece where some of those children and teens that are carrying guns out of fear, we can address that, again, as adults in that piece of the pie. So I think there is a component of that.
One final thing, and I'm sure I don't have a second. One of the things that we really need to do is we need to stop glamorizing violence. Our TVs, our advertisements, everything that we see glamorizes violence. One of the things that I did when the DC Police Department was we started a program and we had 500-600 homicides a year. We said, these kids should do the drive-bys, they never see the body hit the ground. They never see it. So what we did when we arrested them, we took them to the morgue and we let them see what they've done. We need to do that, bring some reality home to this.
Thank you all. Are there any other questions?
Real quick, Lieutenant Thomas, can you explain to the forum about crisis as it relates to mental health, please?
You mean in our response to it, or so?
How it relates to violence.
So it's the unfulfilled, when people have the trauma, they go through, it gives a different understanding of trauma. It's their own psychological healing and the effects that have with that. Another major issue we have is self-medication with alcohol and marijuana and other drugs to make themselves feel better due to trauma that lead to other issues down the road.
Thank you very much. We have another, our final question.
And this,
Is that on?
right there, it's
Yeah,
okay,
it's-
okay. And because I know so many here are invested too, and will forgive me, I'm going to make a quick announcement, but the Supreme Court just came down with a ruling that the citizenship question has been blocked from the questionnaire. This is incredibly good news, incredibly good news. I'm sorry to interrupt this, but I thought it was important enough. So
they got something right. They didn't get gerrymandering right, but they got that right.
At this point, at almost halftime, I'd like to thank Mr. Will Rao, who's been a great moderator for us this morning. Couldn't be better. Mr. Will, we're looking for a second half. Thank you. I got the mic.
Right. Uh-oh. Okay. So I want to thank our panelists. Can you all give them a round of applause? Obviously, one could say prevention and being in the trenches is one of the most meaningful and important aspects of solving some of these issues that we're dealing with, not only in communities, but I know all of these people on this panel also deal with policymakers. They deal with power structures that don't necessarily agree with their ways of getting things done. And I respect you all, and I'm so grateful that we got an opportunity to hear from you, because the work that you do is incredibly meaningful. We touched on response, we touched on trauma. Thank you all very much.